And joining us now on the debate in the nation's capital, Yasir Naqvi, the Liberal MPP for Ottawa Centre. And back here in studio, Lisa MacLeod, Progressive Conservative MPP for Nepean and Carleton. Michael Prue, the New Democrat MPP for Beaches East York. Don Drummond, Chief Economist with TD Bank Financial Group. Len Crispino, President and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. And Erin Weir, economist with the United Steelworkers of America Union. Good to have everybody alongside here tonight. Yasir, nice to see you on the line down there from the nation's capital. It's good to have you here.
Good to be back.
Okay, Don Drummond, I'm going to go to you first. Give us a kind of a tax harmonization 101 here, back to basics. July 2010, when this new tax kicks in, if the opposition don't manage to get it killed in the meantime, how will people's lives be different?
Well, they'll pay taxes in a different way. The prices that they pay tax inclusive on a variety of goods will go down because the business input taxes will be relieved on that, but they will pay taxes on some things that weren't taxed before, on services. In total, the overall prices would go up somewhat. We would estimate that the overall consumer price index level in Ontario would go up about 0.7%. But beneath that, you would have a phenomenal improvement in the competitiveness of the business sector in Ontario.
So you favor this?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's no choice, and I actually agree with the minister in the context that Ontario is going to need every ounce of competitive advantage it has in this competitive world economy going forward, and you can't not do something like this.
Erin Weir, do you favor this tax?
No, I don't particularly favor it. I mean, I think the premise for it is this idea that removing sales tax from capital goods will encourage business investment, which is true, but I would point out that the existing Ontario provincial sales tax already exempts many capital goods, including most machinery and equipment. Really, this notion of business inputs being subject to sales tax is about construction materials and intermediate inputs like office supplies. I'm not convinced that removing tax from those items is going to do much at all to improve our competitiveness or promote investment.
Len Crispino, what do you say?
Well, in terms of that particular viewpoint, there's about $5 billion worth of PST.
Provincial sales tax.
Provincial sales tax currently in the system that we're all paying. The business community is paying it by way of embedded taxes within their cost of production. And you know, when you look at, Ontario is largely an export-driven economy. We are particularly at this point, given where the dollar is going towards parity, that we need to get our exports more in line in terms of reduced cost.
So you favor the government's approach?
We believe that this is one of the best approaches to do that.
Okay. Lisa MacLeod, harmonized sales tax, we're told, will make tax collection more efficient, make policy simpler for business. As a good conservative, should you not be supporting this?
I'll never support raising taxes, and this is a $3 billion tax grab on the part of the McGuinty Liberals. This is a very difficult time in our economy, as I'm sure the economists on this panel will agree. But I'm elected to the Ontario Legislature to fight for my constituents. Those are the people that I'll represent, and they don't want this tax. In addition to that, Steve, people right now are looking at a very fragile economy that has seen their neighbors, their friends, their loved ones lose jobs. It's the wrong time to ask people to pay 8% more on home heating, 8% more on carpentry fees, 8% more on snow removal, 8% more on their kids' hockey. And we're going to fight this. We think it's the wrong tax at absolutely the wrong time. And having grown up in Nova Scotia, I saw some of the impacts that happened in that province, not only politically, but also economically in the home building industry. So I'm going to say that this is probably not the best. The minister and others can talk in their jargon and all of the buzzwords that seem to be popular after budgets and before budgets. But at the end of the day, the taxpayers in this province can't afford any more of Dalton McGuinty's tax increases.
Michael Prue, what's your objection to it?
Well, I think everybody's going to pay more, and you know, a lot of it's hidden. At first, you know, if we went into the legislature and talked about people who are condominium owners and how much is it going to cost them, and the answer was nothing. But the reality is, as the studies are coming out, it's showing that the condominium fees will rise almost 7%. And I mean, you know, renters, it's going to cost them an extra $200 to $300 a year because the money that is being spent for maintenance inside the apartments, inside the condominiums is going up. Every time you fill up a gasoline, it's going to cost more. If you take a cab, it's going to cost more. All of the transportation costs are going to eat away at the consumer. And I agree that costs are going to go up about 1% or 0.7% was said, and the consumers are going to pay, and business is going to. I'm not surprised they like it. They're actually probably going to make some money off this.
Yasir Naqvi, you've heard the complaints here. What would you say in response to those complaints to try to convince people you're right and they're wrong?
Well, this is a whole tax reform package, and I think that's something we need to really focus on. This is about providing a real stimulus to our economy to ensure that we do create jobs. In the end of the day, if our friends and if our neighbors are not working, there are not sufficient jobs because our businesses are not thriving, our economy is failing. And the whole tax reform package, the harmonization of GST and PST, the offsetting income tax cuts, which the opposition does not talk about, and the cut in corporate taxes are meant towards providing a real stimulus to the economy so that Ontario economy continues to grow after this recession is over, so that we can globally compete where our real competitive advantage lies.
Okay, we're going to put one chart up at this point. There are numbers and charts you could sink a ship with on this, but we're going to do one tonight. And Don, we thank you for this. This is out of your TD Economics report from last month. Here's where things will increase in the tax rate. Natural gas, gasoline, fuel oil, and other fuels. Tobacco, tobacco products, portfolio management fees, advisory fees, mergers and acquisitions fees, fees related to RRSPs, RRIFs, RESPs, TFSAs, internet access fees, cleaning, landscaping fees, personal care services, I talked about haircuts before, and facials, recreational services, professional services, taxis. As a result of this whole new package, Don, I think you've said in your report you expect prices to go up about 0.7%.
Right, in Ontario,
In the
0.4, and across Canada, 0.7 in the province.
That sounds like not very much. Is it very much?
It isn't very much, because as I said, you will pay more on some things and you'll pay less on a lot. But I think we got to go back to the original context of this. This is not just an Ontario economy that's at the top of the heap in terms of the world order right now. It's a province that has a very severe competitive problem. And as the Member of Parliament just indicated, that we had 14% provincial corporate tax rate. Everybody else is moving to 10. We've had a huge capital tax. Somehow we called this beast a retail sales tax, but 40% of it comes on business inputs. So as Len was saying, it gets embedded in every export, cuts all the exports margins. It raises about 7 percentage points onto the effective cost of capital. And if you go, why is an Ontario worker having difficulty? Why is their productivity less than, for example, a U.S. worker? They got 55% the stock of machinery and equipment to work with. And I'm saying this is the only thing. But I say you can't afford not to do something like this. You've got to have the cleanest, most competitive economy in Ontario you can possibly imagine. And yeah, there's some wrinkles that come with this, and these relative price changes you went through are part of that. But you got to have competitiveness if you want to have jobs. So we've got to move in this direction.
Lisa, wrinkles.
Wrinkles. Well, to be honest, let's talk about wrinkles. 6 years ago, when this government took office, we had the fastest growing economy in the country. Today, we're lagging, I believe, even behind Prince Edward Island, which is the smallest province in this nation. And that is a significant wrinkle that's not going to be solved by taxing seniors and middle-class families 8% more at consumption. People in this province are being nickeled and dimed to death while they're trying to save for their retirement or put their kids through school. And I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of Ontarians who are in that boat, not on behalf of big business or not on behalf of the manufacturing community. In fact, it's for all Ontarians. This is the wrong tax.
Erin?
I'd just like to pick up on the point Don made about American workers enjoying more machinery and equipment. If you look at the United States, they actually have more retail sales tax on their capital inputs because state taxes south of the border don't make the same exemptions for those inputs that I described. Also, corporate income tax rates are far higher in the United States. The last Ontario budget talked about how our combined corporate income tax rate is going to be fully 15 percentage points below the U.S. Yet the United States, as Don says, actually does have more investment in machinery and equipment. So it's not all about tax rates, and it's not all about this sort of race to the bottom of who can give the biggest tax cuts to business.
I just wanted to say our chief trading partner, like it or not, is the United States. They haven't gone down this route. And so, I mean, we are trying to emulate other jurisdictions with whom we don't trade as much. But I think the thing that I want to key in on is the jobs. I think this is going to be a job killer. And certainly the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, the report, talked about this not helping and reducing jobs, 10 to 40,000 jobs in the short term and more in the long term. The Fraser Institute, who I don't like to quote often, they came out and said that this is also a job killer. I want to know what kind of jobs are being created.
A little bit more carefully page 36 of our report, which clearly says there is no decrease in the current number of jobs.
As a result of this tax?
As a result of this tax. It does not include the improvements in terms of job creation that will result from increased investment in the province, better and more competitive exports that go to the United States in particular.
Len, let me just follow on that. How do you know that's going to happen? One sec. How do you know those things are going to happen?
Well, I think the experience generally from what we have seen in other jurisdictions has shown that in fact it has been the case. You know, ultimately we forget that we think that these savings are just, these tax savings are just for business. Who actually pays these taxes? It's the consumer. It's the consumer that eventually ends up paying for these. So to the extent that you're able to withdraw some of those taxes and rebate some of those taxes, particularly those embedded taxes, then those will flow to the consumer.
But I think Yasir needs to speak to the point that we have heard both tonight and previously, which is that whether you like this or whether you don't like this, the timing when this is being brought in may not be ideal. Is it wise to start taxing a bunch of things you didn't tax before in the middle of the worst recession since the Great Depression? What do you say on that?
Well, the issue around timing is this is the right time to ensure that we create a real stimulus in our economy, that we create the right conditions for our businesses to grow. This is the time when the recession is coming to an end. We want to make sure that our businesses are able to compete globally. One point that is not being made is that we really don't, I mean, we compete with the United States, but we're pretty much an integrated market with the United States. Our real competition in today's global world is with China and India and Russia and Brazil. These are the economies which have tremendously low wages, which we will never go that route. So we need to provide as much competitive advantage to our businesses as possible. Being a subnational government, being a provincial government, obviously our hands are tied. We don't control the Canadian dollar. We don't control the price of oil. But what we do have control over is our tax structure, and as much cushion, as much of a competitive advantage we can provide our businesses, better off they are in terms of producing goods that could be sold in markets abroad like United States, like in Europe, competing against Chinese and Indian produced goods. And this is the right time to bring those changes so that businesses can continue to grow.
Okay, Lisa wants a word.
Sure. To Yasir's point on economic stimulus, we've seen in the past year the Federal House of Parliament put forward a home renovation tax credit. Not only is it wildly popular, but it was endorsed by all major political parties because it was seen to create a stimulus for the economy. In meeting with the London home builders yesterday while I was in London, they're very concerned that the repair and renovation sector is going to be hardest hit. And folks like that can't understand why one level of government, with all political parties, major political parties endorsing an idea to stimulate the economy, looking at renovators and those who are doing repairs as a major economic stimulus group of folks, and on the other hand, now adding a massive 8% tax on home renovations and repairs by the provincial government, it makes no sense. In addition to that, it was nice of Mr. Drummond to put a few of the newly taxed items into his report, but we still haven't seen from the provincial government exactly what they're going to tax. They need to come clean, Steve. They need to publish exactly what's going to be taxed, exactly what's going to be exempted, and exactly at what rate as soon as possible.
Yasir, when do we see that list?
Well, it's easy. I mean, by harmonizing, what essentially we're doing is we're making it PST, the provincial sales tax, work exactly like GST by converting it into a value-added tax. Just whatever we pay GST on, the PST will also be applicable. I mean, we don't need to produce a list. I mean, that is a well-known fact. One of the things in Mr. Drummond's report
That's the challenge.
was it's very clear that on 80% of our consumer spending, we are already paying 13%. Today, we will see only an increase in about 19.3% or so of our consumer spending will go up by additional 8%. And I think that's important to remember.
Okay, stand
the
by,
opposition
stand by.
tries
Erin
to make
wants
a
word here.
point.
I got to spread the time evenly here. Let's go.
Yeah,
Erin?
sure. Just on this notion of the HST as stimulus, I think it actually has two offsetting effects. On the one hand, consumers will note that additional taxes are coming in on some goods and services in July, so they might be inclined to make some of their purchases before that happens, which could help stimulate the economy. On the other hand, businesses know that they're going to get a tax break on their inputs after July, so the incentive for them is actually to delay making purchases until after that point, which will suck stimulus out of the Ontario economy. So I really don't see the HST as a very useful way to provide stimulus.
Okay, Don, let me put this to you. Obviously, there's a political decision at the end of the day that has to be made as to what's covered and what's not. And British Columbia, for example, exempted gasoline, I think, from their harmonized sales tax. Ontario opted not to do that.
Right.
Should they?
Well, first of all, the money doesn't grow on a tree. Let's talk about the broader context. I mean, they're already starting with an acknowledged $8.5 billion deficit. Given the revised numbers for last year, it's probably $20 billion, and growth's not going to take it down anywhere. So, like, they don't have money to be throwing around everywhere. So, fine, you can exempt anything you want, but you're going to have to make it up somewhere else. So, I would say no. I think the most efficient way of recognizing a tax is put a value-added tax at the point of consumption. So as long as you start making that list of further exemptions, you're just going to have to pick it up in a much more damaging way. Vis-a-vis the timing of the tax, and let's face it, the best timing was 15 or 20 years ago. There's never a perfect time. But anyway, we're talking
Never
about
a perfect time, but is this a worse time as opposed to a better time?
No, the sooner the better, I would say. And we've talked about who cannot have sympathy for the workers in Ontario in difficulty, but they're disproportionately had jobs previously in the manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector in Ontario is under siege. And it's not just under siege because of cyclical weakness in the United States. It's the emerging countries' competitiveness challenge to the province. This has been going on for a very long time, masked only in the 1990s by the weak value of the dollar. That's one of the reasons why you got to get it in place so we recover in that industry and get those jobs back.
Glenn?
Yeah, I think in terms of the timing, this is always an issue. There's never a perfect time, obviously.
But there's better and worse times.
Yeah, of course. But we believe at the Chamber that this is probably the very best possible time to do it. Don is absolutely right. This should have been done. If there's a fault, it's that this has not been done earlier. I think in terms of what Don was saying earlier about a slight increase in the inflation period, or short term, we're in one of the lowest inflation periods. So if you're going to do this, this is probably the best possible time to do it.
Let me put this to Michael Prue. One of the things that the revenue minister, who was here earlier tonight, says often is that there are 130 countries around the world that have brought in this tax, harmonized their sales taxes, and not a single one, after a change of government, has revoked it. Mm-hmm. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for every country on earth. I know that in Canada we've been reluctant. We've been reluctant because the GST was so universally hated. And we're also reluctant, I think, because our chief trading partner, the United States, is not willing to go down this route. And so here we are, we're sticking our neck out, and we're trying to take an untried and untested tax in Canadian terms, and we're trying to foist it upon people who absolutely do not want it.
But both of your parties, and Lisa, I'll go to you on this, both of your parties in opposition today, when asked, if you form the next government, will you revoke this tax? And neither one of you will.
Well, no, but how can you? It's written in stone. If you take that, then you have to find $4.3 billion to give back to the federal government. Who would? The whole issue is to make sure it doesn't happen. That's the whole issue, because we can't afford to give back that money.
Michael's right. We've received $4.3 billion from the federal government, and Mr. McGuinty is sending out bribe checks, which are essentially just going to offset this health tax he brought in a few years ago. The reality is, you just posted it on your screen not too long ago, what Mr. Benzie said in the Toronto Star. Mr. McGuinty is going to lock us in for 5 years. What we are doing in the opposition, and I must say we're united on this, is trying to stop this tax before it gets started. And I want to talk a little bit about jurisdictions. If you're going to talk about 130 jurisdictions around the world, you got to be honest. And you got to be honest with what happened in Atlantic Canada. Everyone here knows full well, and the public deserves to know this too, that each one of those provinces, when they made an agreement with the federal government, substantially reduced their sales taxes. This is not the same tax that 130 other jurisdictions in the world are undertaking. And I think that the minister and his parliamentary secretary ought to be honest with the people of this province.
Don.
So we've had a lot of confidence we shouldn't go down this road because the United States doesn't go down this road. So I suppose we'll be talking about we should have a banking system like the United States. That's worked out really well.
I don't think they're saying that.
No.
So the United States has the worst tax system in the world. Let's take advantage of that and do better than them. I mean, they're sitting on a debt to GDP ratio of 100%. Now's the time to pick up. I mean, they have cleaned our clock on competitiveness and productivity historically. This is an arsenal and our tools that we can clean up on them. I want to come back to your point, skepticism, asking where the business would really pass it through. You don't in economics and policy often get to observe experiments. We got two great ones here. 1991, the GST, it all got passed through. And in fact, the government of the day, to quell the unease of voters, actually created a permanent task force and monitored every single price in the economy. And for some reason, greeting cards seemed a little bit shaky, and that was the only thing they came up in 2 years. And
So they did go up.
They went up exactly according to the calculations that business passed 100% of their savings through. Okay. A professor at the University of Toronto looked at the 1996 harmonization of the Atlantic provinces and found that more than 100% of the business savings got passed through to consumers. So we got a lot of history on time that this works the way it's supposed to work.
Len.
I think one of the things that's really important to put all of this into context, we've been talking about, a minor increase here or a bigger increase there. I think you have to look at this as a tax reform package. The HST, or the single sales tax, is really only one component. You've got the elimination of the capital taxes, which is extremely important to the business community. You've got the harmonization of the tax collection. You've got now one tax, one rate, one collector. And the province is actually going to be going out of the business of collecting the provincial sales tax.
You've got 3 checks going out in the mail as well. Coincidentally, I think around election time in 2011, but I'm sure that's a coincidence.
Exactly.
That's not for me to comment on.
All right, Erin, go ahead.
Appropriate people here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Just, on Don's point about the U.S. having the worst tax system in the world, he was the one that used the United States as the example of the country that had more investment in machinery and equipment than Canada. So again, it shouldn't all be about tax rates. The other thing I want to pick up on is this notion that in 1997, when 3 of the Atlantic provinces harmonized, that consumer prices actually went down. Another thing that happened then, as Lisa mentioned, is that those provinces cut the provincial portion of their sales tax from 12% to 8%. So it's hardly surprising.
Because the feds gave them more money.
Yeah, exactly. And also they had their sales tax on a much sort of narrower range of goods to begin with. So it wasn't really an analogous situation. I'm sure if Ontario knocked 4 percentage points off its provincial sales tax, prices would come down.
But the same thing has happened here in a different kind of way. There's reductions in personal income tax, there's reductions in corporate income tax, there's the elimination of the capital tax. It may not be the same in terms of reducing from 13 to 12, but the impact is quite the same.
Let me get Yasir in from Ottawa. Go ahead,
Well,
Yasir.
and that's the point I want to make, that when Lisa talks about the Atlantic provinces reduce their provincial portion of the tax, their provincial portion was much higher than the current 8% right here in Ontario. So they basically now brought it in sync with what's already in Ontario or British Columbia or other provinces. Secondly, as Len just pointed out, that we are also bringing a corresponding cut in personal income taxes as well. And opposition is very selective in not talking about those tax cuts. And those tax cuts are solely geared towards low and middle income Ontarians, because we're reducing the income tax rate by 16.5% on the lowest income tax bracket to ensure that they are offsetting savings for Ontarians, and 93% of Ontarians are actually going to see their personal income tax being reduced. Now, every economist I have spoken to has told me that in a modern economy, the best taxation system is where we tax consumption, because you and I as consumers control our consumption. We can choose as to how much money we want to spend and not spend, but give a tax break on our personal income tax side of things, because that's where the wealth generation comes from. That's where we get to save our money.
All right, well, just a quick follow-up. Are you worried that it looks a little too sweet that you're mailing out? And I know technically it's not you. It's the feds, I know, the Canadian Revenue Agency. But you're doing it 3 times in lead-ups to the 2011 election. Are you worried that that's going to look a little too sweet?
Well, the whole purpose behind, first of all, we're getting $4.3 billion from the federal government. Now, British Columbia is getting, I think, almost $2 billion, and they're pocketing that money. We decided to pass that on to the consumer. The reason we decided to pass on the consumer is that the change we're bringing with the harmonized sales tax, as the TD economic report shows, will increase prices, our cost of living will slightly
I get
go
you.
up. So we want to make sure that before the savings are passed on that first year, consumers have more money in their pocket, so
I
they
get
can
you,
weather
Yasir.
the
Okay, let me go to
change.
Michael and
I
then
have
Lisa.
to
Go
take
ahead.
issue with this because, I mean, there's many ways that the money can be passed down. It can be done through income tax rates. It can be done many ways. These are actual checks that are going in the mail from the government. I mean, this is blatant and sheer electioneering to put them out in the year of election, particularly the last one a month or so before. That's exactly what it is.
You can't complain about that. You guys did it too.
Yeah, it was a dumb idea, and I think a lot of Liberal MPPs have been on the record in the Toronto Star saying it was a dumb idea, and they don't want to go down that same path. Look, I just want to talk a little bit about transparency. We're talking about these $1,000 bribe checks. We're also talking about what the impact is going to be on business, and of course, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business had said that this package has come forward without a lot of transparency behind the back doors. And of course, we also have another question, Steve, is when we harmonize and Ontario and British Columbia actually buy into this harmonized sales tax legislation federally, does that mean it's going to be a hidden tax? And we haven't had an answer yet from the provincial Liberals on whether or not this is going to be a transparent tax or if it's going to be hidden.
Hidden meaning you wouldn't see it on your bill?
You wouldn't see it on your bill. And I think,
Have they made a decision about that yet?
No,
In fact, I would make a bet. They haven't made an official decision, but I would bet it will not be buried into the price. And there's some good reasons. In fact, we tried desperately when we were doing the harmonization with the Atlantic provinces to go that rate. And it doesn't work in Canada because goods that get shipped into Canada from across somewhere else have typically already got the price tag on it, and they move across Canada. Unless you've got the same price point all the way across Canada, you don't because you've got different sales tax rates. It just doesn't work very well.
Well, we have to
So
look at federal
I don't think
legislation
it will work.
before we
No,
make any
it's-
bets, and I
it's
think that they
provincial,
ought to
actually,
be
it controls the
very
price.
transparent
It's not
about
federal,
this.
it's provincial.
Let me follow with you on this then, Lisa. If the tax came in, the single harmonized tax came in not at 13, but at 11 or 10, would you find favor with it then?
No, it's more taxes on more things. And right now, that's not the time to do it. And I'll respectfully disagree with the other panelists. At this point in time, I don't think it's a good idea to look at seniors on a fixed income and tell them that their home heating and their snow removal is going to increase.
Erin?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd just like to say that philosophically, I'd actually be quite happy to support a tax increase if it was going to be paying for vital public infrastructure and services. But this one isn't. Actually, the revenue the government of
That's the whole idea behind it.
Well, no, if you look at the budget, they're actually using the money they gain from this to finance a bunch of corporate income tax breaks, which is really funny because if you believe in the principle that business should pay tax on its profits rather than on its inputs, you should actually combine this removal of sales tax off of inputs with a corresponding increase in the corporate income tax
The
rate.
minister said earlier in the program, if you want good, high-quality public services, as he believes we have in this province, you got to pay for them. And this will bring in more revenue to pay for them. Isn't that what you would
No,
want?
it'll bring in more revenue to finance all these other tax breaks.
Len, is that right?
The province has been a laggard in terms of competitiveness. And to the extent that we can begin to reduce some of those costs, and I go back to what I said earlier with the Canadian dollar, where we're at, because I think it's just a perfect example, almost a perfect storm, where we're trying to decrease the cost of our exports. Our exports are fairly high as it is. Now with the Canadian dollar appreciation, it's going to be that much more difficult. To the extent that we can reduce some of those costs, it's going to make our economy a lot more competitive, a lot more attractive for foreign direct investors.
More jobs for steel workers?
More jobs for everybody,
How about
irrespective
steel
of
workers?
what's been
He's
said
obviously
earlier.
concerned about steel workers. Would there be more steel jobs in this province?
I think that there will be more jobs overall to the whole economy. And when we look back, I think 5 or 10 years from now, I think we will say to ourselves that this is probably one of the smartest things that has actually happened in terms of public policy for tax reform.
Lisa, you got to tell me
Steve.
this. Stand by, Yasir. I'll get to you in one sec. I want to put this to Lisa. If this is such a terrible idea, why is a federal conservative government bringing it in as well?
Well, a federal economic policy I can't speak to. I'm a provincial legislator, and I can tell
But
you
you're a
one thing.
conservative, and they're
Sure, I am.
conservatives.
Sure, I mean, they're looking at macroeconomic policy for the nation. I'm looking at what's going to do to provincial taxpayers. And this is not a good policy provincially. And the finance minister's wife actually agrees with me federally. Let's get back to the point of Ontario being a laggard. Well, that's just actually a new sort of thing, right? A new scenario. This province used to be an economic powerhouse, the economic engine of the country. And it's not since the last 6 years that we've seen a radical decline, mostly because of the mismanagement and the spending by the current government. So you know what? I'm just going to go out there
Mostly
and say this.
because of that?
I'm just going to go out there and say this. How can you look at Ontario taxpayers and ask them for $3 billion more when you just wasted $1 billion at eHealth with nothing to show for it? And I think it's going to be a real tough sell. It's a tough sell in Nepean Carleton. It was a tough sell today in Essex, and it was a tough sell today in Chatham, and a tough sale yesterday in London. And I think Ontario taxpayers have had enough.
Okay, I want to pick up on something. We got 5 minutes and change left to go here. Don Drummond, you brought this up earlier. Ontario, I guess officially, says it has an 18 billion plus deficit right now.
Yeah.
You think it's closer to 20 when it's
Right.
all factored in. Is there any way you can balance that budget 5, 6, 7 years down the road, whenever, if you don't do this?
No, because the retail sales tax will always hold back the province, and it will continue to drain revenues. So it's not a solid base for going into the future.
So you need this tax change in order to balance those books.
Oh, absolutely, and you need some of the aspects that come with it as well. We talked about, we right now have a 14% provincial corporate income tax rate. All the other provinces are heading towards 10. There will not be any corporate income booked in Ontario in that kind of situation. So it has to come as a package. We've got an extremely onerous capital tax, which has been phased out as well. All that income is going to bleed out of Ontario as well. So you need it on the revenue side, but to me, the revenue side is important in the budget, but it's all about jobs. I mean, what do we need to do in Ontario to ensure there'll be growth in jobs going forward? And we have to be competitive, and that has to be part of the package deal, and this is a key part of it.
Yasir, why don't you guys pitch this more as a deficit reduction operation as opposed to tax shifting and that kind of thing?
Well, no, this is about growing the economy, Steve. That's what it is about. It is to make sure that our businesses do better, that they create jobs, because when businesses make money, they pay more corporate taxes. When they create jobs, people have good paying wages, they pay more income taxes. And yes, and that will help to ensure that we do continue to have quality public health care and education and social services in this province. But we need to make sure that the fundamentals are right, that we need to make sure that our businesses are stronger, and then there's growth, that they are successful in their enterprise by hiring more people. I think there's no secret here. There's no cynical plot here. That's the simplest formula. So let's change our tax structure, which, by the way, liberals and conservatives alike in this country agree that this is good public policy. I think we're talking mostly politics here, which we know is always partisan in nature. But from a public policy point of view, this is the right approach to make sure that Ontario manufacturing gets back at a global competitive
Okay,
level.
let me
so
ask
we
deficits.
can
I want
compete.
to ask Michael Prue about deficits. If we're at an 18+ billion dollar deficit right now, and Don Drummond is saying if you don't implement this tax package, you simply won't have the revenues going forward to begin to address that. How do you address that deficit?
You do it the same way governments have done it since the beginning. You start looking at where you have to where you can spend smarter. eHealth is not something that they've done a good job of. There is going to be, as the days unfold, you're going to see more and more groups like eHealth and OLG and all the others who have wasted government funds. You've got to start with that. The second thing, you've got to encourage people to think about the taxes and what those taxes buy, so that people want to pay, so that they want to pay some more, so that they understand it's for schools and hospitals, and businesses have to be made to pay as well. I mean, this whole thing is a transfer so business can pay less tax, so the consumers can pay more. That's the way I see it. That's the way the consumers see it. That's the way the consumers see it too.
With respect, I'd have to disagree strenuously, because if I'm a small business person.
Small business don't see any benefit to this.
No,
the
I'm a small business person.
CFIB, 58%
In real
said they
terms.
don't
Okay,
see
one at a time,
anything.
please. Len, what is your business?
I own a small winery in Niagara.
Okay. How would this improve your life?
Well, it would improve my life because now I only have one set of auditors that are coming to look at my books
Rather than two.
And for a small owner-operator, this is very, very significant. It's a lot of red tape out the window, number one. Number two, I believe that it's really, really important to get at this notion that somehow business isn't going to pass on the savings.
Now, Don's already said they will. We understand
Well,
that.
I think it's a market economy. Why would I not want to pass on the savings if I can compete with the guy next door?
Don?
let's just suppose the hypothesis you do want and you need to raise additional revenues. It's not mine, but let's look at it as a hypothesis. The irony here is you come back to harmonization, because where do you get the additional revenue? From corporate taxes? Well, we've already got 14, everybody else is going to 10. So you're handicapped in moving that. Personal income tax? Well, anybody in Ontario earning up to $60,000 already pays over 60% of their last dollar earned in personal income taxes. Lower income people pay even more than that. I don't think you can move on personal income taxes either. Where can you move? Actually, it comes back on sales tax. If you wanted to raise additional revenues, the only vehicle you've got is sales tax, and you can't do it on the retail sales tax because it comes back and hammers your competitiveness.
Lisa, there is an argument about broadening the base and thereby bringing more revenues in to deal with that deficit. Which
sure, so that revenue equals tax grab on the backs of granny, soccer mom,
okay, but how are you
and
gonna lower the
taxpayer.
deficit?
Well, the reality is this province used to have balanced budgets.
No, how would you lower the deficit
and
going forward?
And then what you've looked at is a government that spend from $67 billion
Lisa, we got a minute and a half to
year
go, and I'm not going to let you kill the clock.
to $100 billion present day.
How
They're
would you lower
growing
the deficit
spending.
without this?
You're going to have to look, as Michael said, at cutting waste and looking at ways we can reduce spending on the public purse.
That going to find you $18 billion a
Well,
year?
we're going to have to start somewhere, because this group that's been in power for the last 6 years has dug us a pretty deep hole. And I really reject the notion it's got to be taxpayers in this province who are going to have to get us out of Mr. McGuinty's mess.
Okay, Erin, I got 30 seconds.
Sure, let me tell you how I'd balance the budget. I wouldn't be slashing Ontario's corporate income tax rate from 14% down to 10%. That alone is going to cost more money than the harmonized sales tax will bring in. I mean, the government can't have this both ways. It can't say it needs the HST to balance the budget on the one hand, but that it's going to be this sort of revenue neutral thing to finance other tax breaks on the other hand.
Okay, that's the last word tonight. Thank you, everybody, for I think, mostly very civilized debate this evening. Much appreciated. In the nation's capital, Yasir Naqvi, the MPP for Ottawa Centre. Yasir, nice to have you on the program again tonight.
Thank you.
On the left-hand side of the table, there's Michael Prue from the NDP, Lisa MacLeod from the Conservatives, and Erin Weir, the economist from the United Steelworkers. And on the other side of the table, Len Crispino from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, Don Drummond, TD Bank Financial Group. Thanks, everybody, very much. Now, for more information about tonight's guests and to read the TD Economics Special Report on the impact of the HST in Ontario that we've talked about tonight, please visit us online at tvo.org/theagenda. Tonight's program was produced by Mark Brosens and Melissa Martin. And you can read Mark's post called Aboriginals and the HST. Yes, there's an angle there you'll want to know about. That's on our Inside Agenda producers blog.